Today's unSeminary resource is brought to you by Aware 3. At Aware 3, their goal is to help your church build connections using mobile technology. They help you extend church beyond Sunday mornings by putting it in the palm of everyone's hand. Learn more about how a custom mobile app can help you improve engagement, communication, and generosity at www.aware3, that's the number 3.com.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Well, happy Thursday, everybody. It's Rich Birch from the unSeminary podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're celebrating today, and I know what you're saying. Well, what are we celebrating? Hard to believe, but the unSeminary podcast is 3 years old this month. We're celebrating over 180 different episodes, interviews with church leaders, really who are doing some pretty amazing things. And I am just so glad that you've decided to tune in. And we're doing something special all month. We're doing this really cool thing where we are interviewing leaders from around the world. See, most of our interviews have been with leaders from the States because, 95 or more percent of the people who listen in, the thousands, about 5,000 listeners a week, listen into this, and the vast majority of them are from the States. But what I want to do is take an entire month where we learn from leaders around the world in contexts that really are maybe more adverse to the gospel than our part of the world, and learn from them about the ministry that's happening in their part of the world, and really ask them to help us apply those lessons to our church. And today is no exception. We're starting with Ken Costa. He is the chairman of Alpha. It's an amazing organization from the UK that's really been doing some amazing work around the world. And actually, we're going to be doing 2 episodes a week starting on Monday. We've got an incredible leader from Japan that you're going to want to tune in for and hear about what it's like to reach that part of the world. Why are we doing this? Because we're getting ready for the launch of my very first book, which comes out on November 1st. It's called Unreasonable Churches, 10 Churches Who Zagged While Others Zigged and Saw Impact Because of It. I want to see your church reach more people than you've ever reached before. And so we're putting together this series of podcasts and the book really to celebrate you and to celebrate the things that we're hoping will happen in your church. So please tune in all month. Tell your friends about this special podcast series. And then also go to unseminary.com/unreasonable to get on the wait list. We will be talking about the book all month, but I want you to join a special wait list where those will be the people that will find out, the most up-to-date information, and we'll find out first when we're launching the book. So you can do that by simply just going to unseminary.com/unreasonable. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's interview. It's going to be amazing. It's with Ken Costa. Ken is an incredible leader who literally has had a global influence through his organization, Alpha. You're going to hear a lot more about Alpha and the amazing work that they're doing. But let's listen in and listen closely for what you could apply to your church about what it would mean to reach your community. Thank you so much for being a part of the unSeminary community over these last 3 years, and I look forward to the next 3 years and what that will have in store. Thanks for joining us for this special anniversary month.
This is the unSeminary podcast. Stuff you wish they taught in seminary.
We've got Ken Costa with us. He's the chairman of Alpha International, was an international banker, has done a lot in his life, and I'm just really excited to have. It's always nice to have somebody from across the pond. So Ken, welcome to the show.
Very good to be able to talk to you and to talk to all the people that are listening to your podcast, even if I have a slightly odd Downton Abbey accent.
It's so funny. I have this running joke that I like to do when I meet folks from the UK. I'll say, your accent, is what part of Texas are you from? And you would be amazed over the years the reactions I get to that. A little bit of a shock. But anyway, so why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, Ken? Sure. Give us a sense of your story.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. So I grew up in South Africa, grew up in the horrible years when the apartheid system was really still going there. Really, everything within me as a young student rebelled against the sort of injustice of it all. Left South Africa with not really any degree of faith. Came over to England, came to Cambridge University. Faith came alive. began to see that, there is a real sense of a God who cares for justice, which makes a difference to one's life. And I thought, I want to make a difference. So I read law and theology at Cambridge University. I read theology because I just wanted to see whether the enthusiasm with which one sort of took on the faith was actually had any kind of rational basis. And I realized then that, if theology isn't something to do with the practical life of an ordinary person, it's of no use at all. And so I then went into what we call the City of London, which is the finance district of London. Had been there for 40 years, still there. Became chairman of 2 major financial institutions. And at the same time, was very active in Holy Trinity Church, which is the largest Anglican church in the UK, preaching there, writing, and also just taken on being Dean of the Leadership College London, which is there to try to help young Christians, particularly in their 20s and 30s, to make sense of the workplace so that they are not constantly only at the mercy of what they might hear on a Sunday, wonderful as that may be. But it does need, you need some extra tools, particularly in the stressful workplace that there is at the moment. So, I've got a little mantra which says my workstation is my worship station. And when we learn that these things run together, that's great. So my lovely wife, who has just completed a PhD in the study of the effects of music on older people. Fortunately, I'm not a candidate yet. And 4 children, and we live in London.
Nice, very good. Well, I really appreciate that. One of the things I've tried to encourage people over the years. I was in the marketplace for a little bit before I jumped into vocational ministry, and I've always tried to encourage people over the years. If you read Scripture, it seems like God is more at work in reaching people in the marketplace than He is in holy places. If you look throughout Scripture, God calls people when they're in their day jobs, whether they're out working in a field and there's a burning bush, or whether they're fishermen and Jesus is calling them, or even if they're tax collectors. It seems like God pursues people in the marketplace, and I think sometimes we can forget that.
I think that's absolutely right. And the fact of the matter is, if we want to see a revival, which we all long for, of faith in Jesus Christ growing, it will be because ordinary men and women in their workplaces become the evangelists for the nations. It can't be done by the pastors, much as we love the pastors.
Very true.
And they themselves agree. So it's a good thing. And I always tease my pastor friends with one little thing, which is, Jesus turned up. You would have expected him at least to have 1, if not 2 rabbis, or religious leaders amongst the 12. He didn't.
That's a good point.
Every single one of them came from the workplace. So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's some hidden message.
Absolutely. Well, we've been taking time out to kind of hear about the spiritual climate of various countries. I wonder if you can kind of give us the sense, help us understand kind of the spiritual climate of England, of the UK.
Well, that is unfortunately depressing, and I wouldn't want to depress you. In the last month, for the first time ever, for over 1,000 years, those who regard themselves as having into the census as saying that their religious affiliation is none, the nuns as we call it, exceed those who would identify themselves as Christian. That's profoundly serious. And it's a trend that we've noticed over the years. And it's one that, personally, I think we need to address very seriously, particularly to a young generation, and trying to make sense of, what the gospel is to a modern generation.
Now, you've obviously seen that trend happen over a number of years. We see that happening on this side of the pond as well. What have been some of the signposts that you've kind of seen, the evidence of that? Obviously, there's ultimately the statistical reality of that, but what are some of the ways that's working its way out in your culture?
Well, the weird thing is the continued desire for understanding spirituality and spiritual truth. That is undiminished. we've seen greater investment by people into ethical investments. We've seen an increase of those wanting to join political causes with a small p, that may be related to the environment or to justice, as it may be. But we've seen a decline in those wanting to become involved in a church, because the whole understanding of the church has got a negative view, sadly, which one of the things that we're trying to do in Alpha, through the new Alpha film series, is to reach to that generation and to create the sort of reality of what true life in Jesus Christ really is.
Absolutely. And this is probably a great way to kind of pivot. What is it that, Alpha is? First of all, for folks that don't know Alpha, which is always a surprise when I bump into leaders that haven't heard of Alpha, why don't you give us a description of Alpha, and then maybe can you give us a sense of how God is using Alpha in the UK to see people take steps closer to Him?
Sure. So Alpha is basically a 10-week course, an introduction to the Christian faith, which was developed by a great friend of mine called Nicky Gumbel. And it has a simple format. It is recognized, particularly in a postmodern and millennial generation, people like to come together. They like to have a sense of belonging. So they come together and we have a meal together, which is a crucial part of it. Then a very short introduction to one of the key themes of the Bible, why Jesus, why pray, what about the church? And then a discussion group in which we enable people to talk without being given answers, which is a key part of this. So there's no pressure, and not only is there no pressure, it's very postmodern in the view that, we'd like to hear what your views are. The reason being that Alpha takes people on a journey. And as they learn in this journey, so they get to a stage where they see faith, are filled with the Spirit of God, and want to live their lives in a very different way. And we have seen just the most remarkable evidence of it, whether it's in hardened criminals in our prison system coming to faith and bringing the people with them, whether it's the rich or the poor, the educated, the uneducated. In this country and other countries, 29 million people have been through the course. And it is a work of God. I mean, people say, oh, well, you're very good at marketing, etc. Well, I know many Christian organizations are very good at marketing. That isn't the test. Some of them fail, some of them don't. But this, I do think, is just tapped into a way of sharing the good news of Jesus in a very sort of relaxed way with people who are seeking to go on a journey and finding Jesus on the journey. So that is, and one of its greatest strength, I think, is it's totally non-denominational. You have many people that are Catholics and Baptists and Anglicans and Pentecostals all coming together without any sort of distinctions or feelings of unease, and that's just typical of a generation.
Right. Yeah. If you haven't seen, particularly to the people that are listening in, if you haven't seen the new Alpha film series, that's pretty recent, right? Like
just out.
Yeah,
it's brilliant because it's shot all over the world. Yeah.
It's so well done, and the thing I want to encourage leaders who are listening in, so don't miss this. So Alpha is literally born out of a culture where a lot of the communities we're in are heading towards a post-Christian, post-religious culture, really still spiritual, but really in a post-Christian, post-religious environment. And it's asking, I think it's very well done, it's high quality, and it's doing it in a way that we have to learn how to communicate with. The assumptions that, are really a bygone era of like this kind of assumed kind of Christian understanding. We have to get over communicating like that. We've got to communicate in a way that people, who don't have any understanding of Scripture or very little understanding of Scripture, can ultimately see Jesus more clearly. And that's what I love about Alpha, and particularly the new film series. I think is so well done. It's so high quality. The thing I love about Alpha, and it could be maybe because of the British roots, I do feel like if it came out of like, and I'm going to kick my friends in like Nashville, Tennessee, if it came out of Nashville, Tennessee, Man, it would be like people would be ranting and raving about it and like making this huge deal and like it would be, but then there's this British, I think cultural humility where it's like, well, 29 million people have gone through that. But I'm like, what? That's amazing. Like, that's incredible. So,
You're very kind, and it's hugely helpful, particularly for a modern generation. If you're struggling with young people leaving the church, I don't know any other tool and it's a tool. There are many others. That is as effective as drawing them back in as Alpha is.
Now, the switch to, or I don't know if it's a switch, but the change on the most recent kind of film series, what was some of the thinking behind that? Because it does seem, it's been a while, frankly, since I'd looked in on Alpha's resources, and this most recent version of it just seems, it's different. It has a different kind of feel to it. But what drove that? Well,
what drove that is that we've got, in order to stay ahead of the curve, we have a continuing innovation process of innovating and changing. And we've realized that, particularly for a younger generation, actually having a talking head for 35 minutes, explaining some aspect of the gospel is great if you're already there, but it doesn't really entice those who are not. So we reformatted this whole thing by showing, firstly, the global nature and the cultural diversity of the people who've been on Alpha. So we had to travel around the world, and it's written in docu-style. It's a conversational style, still with works from Nicky Gumbel and his words in there, but much more what people would be used to watching if they were watching a documentary. So it again produces a very relaxed atmosphere. But the truths are all the same, and the truths are the ones that this vehicle is enabling people to get at in a very modern way.
Absolutely. Now, changing gears a little bit, I want to hear a little bit about your most recent book. So you've wrote this book. It's called Know Your Why: Finding and Fulfilling Your Calling in Life. Why did you write this book? What was kind of motivating you to say, hey, I want to sit down? It's a lot of work to pull together, 60,000 words to make it work. What was it that drove you to write this book?
Well, I think of all the questions, and I spent, in the last 40 years or so, the mentoring younger people, mentoring people in the church, the one question more than any other question, and particularly intensively in the last 7 years or so, that has come up is, what am I doing? What is unique about what my calling is in life? Is there such a thing as calling? Or do I just muddle on? And the reason for that is that we are, whereas I would have had one, maybe two jobs in the rest of in my life when I first started working, no self-respecting millennial would think of anything other than sort of half a dozen to a dozen.
Right.
So that means one has to really understand what it is that you're made of, why God has called you to a season and to enjoy that season, and at the same time to be prepared at the right time to move into another season of life. So it's this desire for purpose, for meaning and change, meaning within a changing and very rapidly changing workplace that has created a lot of stress and anxiety. But when you grasp this, that you're loved, you're known, and you're called, it's the basis upon which judgments are made. There's an incredible sort of flow and freedom and flourishing of life, which previously had been really rather depressing. So that's why Know Your Why is on the bookshelves now, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had a chance. I literally just got my hands on a copy yesterday. I haven't had a chance to read it. I thumbed through it, and it looks amazing. Looks like a great tool, I think, for church leaders who, as they're engaging with their people, trying to help again, communicate, as you're saying, around what are people's purpose and identity in life. I think it could be a great tool for folks. It's a great time of year. People are looking for Christmas gifts, so it could be a great,
You start preparing for Christmas quite early.
Yeah, no, that's.
One of the things also to say is that yes, it is true that it's an individual to know my why is an important bit, but we need to realize that worldwide, our country is no different, and I dare say the same as yours. There is an identity crisis about what it is that we are, as a society, trying to achieve.
Right.
And therefore, it is true of a citizen as it is of a community, of a church, of a city, and of a country. Know your why is this desire and for identity is a essential brick in what I believe God is building for us to help our countrymen understand that you can know your why. There is a God who is able to help us on that journey.
Very cool. Well, kind of as we wrap up, I would love to hear from you. If you have a very a global perspective, obviously through Alpha, you have an opportunity to interact with leaders all over the world. What would you say to some church leaders in North America as we're trying to serve our culture, as we're trying to reach the people that God has put in our communities? What advice or what counsel would you give to us as we try to wrestle with those issues in our part of the world?
Well, I wouldn't presume to be able to give you very much, but an observance just from where we are two things. The first is that your young adults, that your young people in their 20s coming into the workplace, are drifting away at a rate that is perfectly alarming. If our Alpha statistics are true. We've experienced this, but probably maybe 10 or 15 years before you.
Right.
Previously, Alpha didn't take off in the US. It is now because it was seen to be we were all Christians. So why do you want an evangelistic cause to see people come to Christ? And it's taking off now because many of the churches are realizing that this is what is happening. People are drifting from the faith, have no faith, and the nuns are growing. Generation that is not educated in the church or the Bible. So that's very important to just recognize some of the experience we've had in the secularization process. The second is, it's profoundly serious for the world if America loses its confidence in the gospel. That is really, really challenging.
Well, Ken, I appreciate that. I appreciate that word. I appreciate you, being on today and just the work that you do. I just want to say thank you for your, the support that you've given to Alpha over the years, the difference it's made in so many people's lives, the way it's helped so many churches, and appreciate that you're continuing as an organization, continuing to push to the future and say, hey, it worked great 15, 20 years ago, but we've got to reinvent this. We've got to think about the future. We've got to reach new folks, and I appreciate that. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about your book or in touch with Alpha, how can they do that? What's the best way for them to do those things?
Well, the two ways, is clearly buy the book, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever bookstores that they're close to, which would be the first place. The second would be godatwork.org.uk. Or the Know Your Why Facebook and website that they can access. And for those who are searching for their why, find your why, know your why, and when you've found it, help others to find theirs.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unSeminary.com and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.